There is a word in your Bible that should not be there. It appears exactly one time in the entire King James Version. Just once. Not twice. Not scattered through several books. Not buried in a footnote somewhere at the bottom of a page. Once. One word. In one verse in one book. And most people who have read the Bible their entire lives have never once stopped to question it. They have read right past it. Because the word itself is so familiar, so culturally embedded, so completely woven into what English-speaking Christianity says and does every spring, that no one asks the question this word demands. Where did it come from? Because here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. That word does not belong in that sentence. The original language underneath it does not support it. In the original Greek of the New Testament, that word does not exist. Every major Bible translation produced in the last 50 years looked at that same verse, at that same underlying Greek, and chose a completely different English word. Not as a theological statement, not as a revision, because the Greek required it. And the moment you understand what word was there before, and what word replaced it, and what was lost in that replacement, everything you thought you understood about the most celebrated feast in Christian history begins to look different. The word is Easter. Now stay with me, because this is not an argument about what you call the holiday or how your church marks the season. This is about something more precise than that. This is about one translation decision made in 1611 that placed a word in your English Bible that the original Greek never put there. And almost every Bible on shelves today has already corrected it, quietly, without ever telling you. And I want to show you exactly where it is. If this channel is new to you, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. We go into the original languages here. We go into the manuscript history and the translation decisions that shaped the Bible you hold in your hands. Hit the like button if you want this message to reach someone who needs it. And share this with someone who calls themselves a student of the Word. Now, the verse is Acts chapter 12, verse 4. That is the only time in the entire King James Bible, from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, that the word Easter appears as a translation of any Hebrew or Greek text. One time. But here is what makes this so staggering. The Greek word underneath that English word Easter appears 28 other times in the New Testament. And in every single one of those 28 other places, the King James translators chose a completely different English word. Not Easter. Passover. By the end of this video, you will know why. You will know what the Greek word actually means, where the word Easter came from, the chain of decisions that locked it into your English Bible, and what was quietly lost in the translation. Because there is something hiding underneath that one word. Something that connects the blood on the doorframe in Egypt to the cross at Calvary in a way that the English word Easter was never built to carry. Stay with me. We are just getting started. So let me take you back to where this word actually appears. Not to 1611, not to a translator's desk in England, but to the place where the scene is set, to Jerusalem. And the year is approximately 44 AD. The church is not yet 20 years old. The apostles are still in the city. They are preaching in the streets, in the synagogues, in the homes where believers gather. The temple is still standing. The feast calendar is still running. And they are being watched, because there is a new king in Jerusalem, and he has learned something about political survival in this city that he intends to put to use. His name is Herod Agrippa I. He is the grandson of Herod the Great. Born around 10 BC, He is somewhere between 53 and 54 years old at this moment. Rome has appointed him king over Judea. He now rules more Herodian territory than any man since his grandfather. And he understands one thing with absolute clarity. The Jewish population doesn't trust his family. So he has begun doing whatever it takes to change that. And what it takes, apparently, is killing Christians. He has already executed James, the brother of John, one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. He watched the crowd's reaction. He saw that it pleased them. And so now he moves against Peter. He arrests him during the Passover season. He places him under heavy guard, 4 squads of 4 soldiers, 16 soldiers in total, and he waits. He is going to put Peter on public trial as a demonstration for the people. But he will not do it during the feast. He will wait until it is over. Now listen to how Luke records this moment. The text is Acts chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison, and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. There it is. Verse 4. Read that last line again. A Jewish king in Jerusalem, arresting a Jewish apostle, during a Jewish feast, and the word the translators use to describe the timing of his plan is Easter. Nothing in this scene involves a Christian spring celebration. Everything in this scene is anchored to the Passover. In the Jewish calendar, Passover falls on the 14th of Nisan. The Feast of Unleavened Bread begins the very next day and runs for 7 days. These are the same festival days, the same season. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread is named in verse 3, 1 sentence before the word Easter appears. The Greek word underneath Easter is the word for that very season. Not Easter, Passover. And we know this event is not legend. The death of Herod Agrippa I in 44 AD is confirmed by the historian Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 19. His death anchors the chronology of Acts 12 more precisely than almost any other event in that book. The historical ground is solid, and sitting right in the middle of that solid ground is a single word that doesn't belong. We are about to find out how it got there. The Greek word underneath that English word Easter is Pascha. That is the word. That is what Luke wrote when he composed the original text of Acts chapter 12. Not a Christian festival name, not a reference to a spring celebration. Pascha. The same word the New Testament authors have been using for the Passover feast from the very first pages of the Gospels. Now here is what I need you to understand about that word, because it does not appear in Acts 12 in isolation. It appears all across the New Testament. You can open your King James Bible to the Gospels, to the letters of Paul, to the book of Acts itself, and you will find this word again and again and again. Luke wrote it. Matthew wrote it. John wrote it. Paul wrote it. The Greek word Pascha appears 29 times in the entire New Testament. 29 times. And the King James translators made a decision about this word 29 times. And here is what they decided. 28 times they translated it as Passover. 28 times, when they opened their Greek text and saw the word Pascha, they rendered it in English as Passover. They did this in Matthew. They did this in Mark. They did this in Luke and in John. They did this in the letters of Paul. They did this in the book of Acts, in that very same book where Acts chapter 12 sits. 28 times, in book after book and verse after verse, the Greek said Pascha and the English said Passover. And then there is Acts 12, verse 4. There they wrote Easter. One time, out of 29. And here is what makes this so difficult to set aside. The Greek underneath Acts 12:4 is not a different form of the word. It is not a variant. It is not a cognate. It is not a related term. It is the exact same Greek word, carrying the same spelling, the same form, the same meaning, that appears 28 other times in that same Bible and is translated Passover in every single one of them. The underlying Greek is identical in all 29 cases, every single one. And in 28 of those 29, the King James Version looked at that Greek word and chose correctly. In one, it did not. Now, here is where it becomes impossible to argue with. Because this is not a debate between the King James Bible and modern scholars with a different theology. This is a matter of what the Greek says, and you can test it yourself by opening any major Bible in print today. The translators who worked on the New International Version looked at Acts 12:4, saw the Greek, and chose Passover. The English Standard Version, Passover. The New American Standard Bible, Passover. The New King James Version, Passover. The Christian Standard Bible, Passover. The New Living Translation, Passover. Every major translation published since the late 20th century has rendered this verse the same way it renders that same Greek word in every other place it appears. The correction has already been made. Quietly, in edition after edition, in printing after printing, the word has been changed back to what the Greek says. Most people sitting in churches today do not know it happened. But this raises the question that everything in this video is building toward. If the Greek word is Pascha, and Pascha means Passover, and every modern translation in print agrees it means Passover in this verse, then where did the word Easter come from in the first place? How does a word with no Greek root and no Hebrew root end up in a sentence about a Jewish king holding a Jewish apostle during a Jewish feast? The answer to that question does not start in 1611. It starts much further back than that. And that is exactly where we are going next. So let me ask you something before we go any further. If you were going to name a feast after an event, after the specific thing that happened on the night the feast was meant to remember, what would you do? You would put the event in the name. You would build the word around the action. And that is exactly what the Hebrew language did. The Hebrew word for the Passover feast is Pesach. It comes from the verb pasach, which means to pass over. The feast was named for the night in Exodus 12, when the Lord moved through Egypt, and the houses marked with blood were spared. The destroying angel passed over. Pasach. The feast is named for the act. The name carries the event inside it. Every time that word was spoken in the synagogue, every time a Jewish family sat down for the Passover meal and heard that word, the night in Egypt was present in the word itself. And when that word moved out of Hebrew into the rest of the ancient world, the scholars who carried it did not replace it with something else. They kept the root. They kept the sound. They brought it with them. Around 250 BC, Jewish scholars in Alexandria began translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. When they came to Pesach, they did not reach for a Greek substitute. They brought the Hebrew word across as a loan word, Pascha. Same root, same sound, same meaning. The night in Egypt, now in Greek letters. From Greek, the word passed into the New Testament. Luke used it. Matthew used it. Paul used it. Pascha, the Passover, carried forward in every gospel and every letter. and from the New Testament it passed into Latin, again carried as a loan word. Pascha. Jerome's Latin Bible kept it exactly. The word travelled with its meaning attached, from Hebrew into Aramaic, from Aramaic into Greek, from Greek into Latin, and from Latin into the languages of the world. And here is what I need you to understand. Most of the world never stopped saying Pascha. If you are a Spanish-speaking Christian, the resurrection feast is called Pascua. If you speak French, it is Pâques. If you speak Italian, it is Pasqua. Portuguese, it is Pasqua. Russian, it is Pascha. The Greek Church calls it Pascha, the same word as the New Testament. In Arabic, it is Fasih. In the Coptic Church, it is Pascha. Every single one of those words is the same word, dressed in different letters from different languages. Every one of them traces back to Pesach, to that Hebrew verb, to the night in Egypt. The connection between the death of Jesus and the deliverance of Israel has been preserved in the name of the feast across 2,000 years and dozens of languages. The world didn't forget, with one exception, the Germanic languages. In English, we say Easter. In German, Ostern. These words do not come from Pesach. They do not come from Pascha. They come from somewhere else entirely. And in a Bible culture that reads and prays and worships primarily in English, that departure from the Pascha root matters. Because when the name of the feast no longer carries the memory of what the feast is about, something has been quietly lost. Notably, even in German, the theological and liturgical term for the feast is still Pascha. But in everyday English, the Passover connection disappeared from the name entirely. So the question is, what happened? What replaced Pascha in the English-speaking world with a word from a completely different world? And the answer is a single monk in 8th century England who left us one paragraph in one book written around 725 AD. And that is exactly where we are going next. If this video is already stirring something in you, this is the moment. Hit the like button right now. Every time you do, this message travels further, and one more person gets to see what you are seeing. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to keep going this deep. And if someone comes to your mind right now, a student of the Word, or someone who has been reading past this question their whole life, send them this video. We are right at the center of the argument, and the next section is where everything begins to come together. Where did the word Easter come from? Let us find out. The answer begins in the north of England, in a monastery called Wearmouth Jarrow in the region of Northumbria, and the year is 725 AD. There is a monk living there named Bede. He was born around 672 AD, which makes him approximately 52 or 53 years old when he writes the book we are about to read from. He has spent nearly his entire life in that monastery, studying scripture, working through questions of history and the calendar. In 725 AD, he completes a work called De Temporum Ratione, which means the reckoning of time. It is a book about how to measure and calculate time, how to establish dates on the calendar, how to name the months and the seasons. And in chapter 15 of that book, a chapter he calls De Mensibus Anglorum, which means the English months, he records what the old Anglo-Saxon people used to call each month of the year before the Christian calendar arrived. And when he gets to the spring month, he writes one paragraph. It is not long, but it contains a name. This is what he writes. The Latin text reads, Eosturmonath, qui nunc paschalis mensis, interpretatur, quondam adea illorum, quae eostre vocabatur, et qui in illo festa celebrabant, nomen habuit. And in English that passage reads, Eosturmonath, which is April, has a name which is now translated Paschal Month, and which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Eostre, in whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. That is the passage. One paragraph. One book. One monk, written in 725 AD. Now here is what I need you to understand about that paragraph. Everything that has ever been claimed about the pagan origins of the English word Easter traces back to this single passage. Every argument, every article, every sermon that says Easter was the name of a pagan spring goddess, every piece of that claim comes from Bede's one paragraph. There is no other ancient source for the goddess Eostre. Not a second monk who mentioned her. Not a runic inscription. Not an archaeological site. Not a carved image. Nothing. One man. One paragraph. One manuscript tradition. Bede's testimony is the entire ancient record for the goddess Eostre. That is all there is. That is the complete foundation of the argument. But here is what most people who quote that passage never stop to consider. There is something about this passage, and something about the word Easter itself, that changes the argument more than the passage does. And that is exactly where we are going next. You have probably seen a video, or a post, or maybe someone told you in a conversation that the English word Easter comes from Ishtar, the ancient Babylonian goddess. That the Christian Church took a pagan goddess name and stamped it onto the resurrection of Jesus. Maybe you believed it. Maybe you shared it. The claim has traveled far. It shows up in videos that get millions of views, in posts that get shared hundreds of thousands of times, in conversations in churches and classrooms and living rooms. I need to tell you that this claim is not true. The word Easter and the word Ishtar are not related. They do not share a common root. They do not share a common ancestor. They come from entirely different language families. Ishtar is a Semitic word. It comes out of the ancient Near East, from the same linguistic family as Hebrew and Arabic and Aramaic. Easter and Eostre are Germanic words. They come from the Northern European language tradition, the same family that gives us Old English and German and the Scandinavian languages. These two families are not connected. They did not share a common ancestor in any recoverable past. The sounds are similar to the human ear, and that is where the claim comes from. Not from etymology, not from history, not from any scholar. From the way two unrelated words happen to sound alike to someone who has never studied either language. This is what modern linguists actually say about Easter. The word traces back through Old English to the Germanic month name Eos Terminath, the spring month Bede described, and the deeper root of that name connects not to any goddess specifically, but to a Proto-Germanic word for dawn, or for east, the direction of the rising sun. Not Babylon, not a fertility cult. The direction from which the light comes. That is the actual linguistic territory the word Easter lives in. Dawn. East. The direction of the rising sun. Now, here is what I need you to understand. Whether the word Easter ultimately traces to a goddess of the dawn, or simply to a word for the dawn itself, the result is the same for the argument we have been building. Not one letter of the word Easter points toward the Passover, not toward the night in Egypt, not toward the blood on the doorframe, not toward the Lamb whose death spared a nation. None of that is in the word Easter. None of it. The word Pascha carries all of it. It carries the Passover in every syllable, from the Hebrew verb Pasach to Passover, all the way to the French Pâques, and the Spanish Pascua, and the Russian Pascha. That meaning has been preserved, but the word Easter carries none of it. And this is the question at the center of everything we have covered. How did a word with no Passover connection end up as the only appearance of this feast's name in the English Bible? The answer is a story about one man, a translator, a man who changed the English language more than almost anyone who ever lived, and who in doing so created an inconsistency in his own work that would shape the English Bible for the next 5 centuries. That is exactly where we are going next. His name was William Tyndale, and he died for this book. He was born around 1494, which makes him approximately 32 years old when he published the first printed English New Testament in 1526. He believed that ordinary English-speaking people deserved to read the scriptures in their own language. The authorities who governed the church in England disagreed. They pursued him across Europe, and on October 6, 1536, they executed him at Vilvoorde, in what is now Belgium, for the act of translating the Bible into the language of the people. He was approximately 42 years old. The translation decisions he made before that day shaped every English Bible that followed. And he is the man who put the word Easter in your New Testament. In 1526, when Tyndale published his New Testament, he needed an English word for the Greek Pascha, and he used the word Easter. Now, here is what I need you to understand about that choice. It was not ignorance. It was not carelessness. In 1526, the English language did not yet have the word Passover. That word did not exist. Tyndale had not invented it yet. Easter was the current English word available to him for that feast season. And so that is the word he chose. 4 years later, everything changed. In 1530, Tyndale began working on the Hebrew Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses. And when he came to the Hebrew word Pesach, the feast in Exodus 12, he did something that the English language had never done before. He did not use Easter. He looked at the Hebrew verb pasach, to pass over, and he built a new English word directly out of the action. He called it Passover. Just like that, the English language had a word it had never had before. The word had never existed before, 1530. And the moment Tyndale wrote it down, it carried the night in Egypt inside it. The action of the Lord passing over the blood-marked houses, now made English, in one compound word that Tyndale had built for the purpose. No one had ever done this. Tyndale did it in 1530. But here is what Tyndale never did after that. He never went back to his New Testament. His 1526 New Testament still had Easter at Acts 12:4. His 1530 Pentateuch had Passover for the Hebrew feast. 2 English words, the same God, the same night in Egypt, the same act of deliverance, now described by 2 different words in 2 different parts of Tyndale's own translation, and Tyndale left both of them standing. He never reconciled them. He never corrected the 1526 text to match the precision of the 1530 word. The inconsistency was built into his own body of work, and every English Bible that came after him inherited it. Every translator who came to Acts 12:4 in the decades that followed looked at what Tyndale had written, saw the word Easter, and left it where it was. They did not fix it. They did not question it. They kept it. The word Tyndale had chosen in 1526 traveled forward through translation after translation, unchanged. Tyndale's inconsistency became tradition, and tradition, as you are about to see, became law. Tyndale died in 1536, and in the years that followed, the English translations kept coming, and every one of them had a choice to make at Acts 12:4. 13 years after Tyndale's New Testament, a new English Bible appeared. It was called the Great Bible, and it was authorized to be placed in every church in England. The year was 1539, and at Acts 12:4, The Great Bible used the word Easter. Not because the translators had examined the Greek and determined Easter was right, not because of any fresh look at the text, because Tyndale had used it, and Tyndale was the foundation they were standing on. The tradition was only 13 years old, and it was already treated as settled. The word Tyndale had chosen, because Passover did not yet exist, was now being treated as though it had always been there. It had been read from pulpits. It had been heard in worship. And now it was being printed in the authorized Bible of the Church of England. The tradition was hardening. Then, in 1560, something happened that should have ended the story right there. A group of Protestant scholars working in Geneva produced a complete English translation of the Bible. It is called the Geneva Bible. It was not a marginal text. When it first reached England, it instantly became the preferred Bible of the English people. More than 360,000 copies were printed across 180 editions. The Scottish Church adopted it as its official Bible for worship. A Scottish law passed in 1579 required every household of sufficient means to own a copy. For more than a century, the Geneva Bible was the most widely read English Bible in the world. And when those scholars came to Acts 12:4, they did something no English translator had done before. They looked at the Greek, they saw Pascha, and they wrote Passover. Not Easter. Passover. The most widely circulated English Bible of its generation looked at that verse and got it right. 8 years later, the correction was reversed. In 1568, a new English Bible appeared. It is called the Bishop's Bible. And at Acts 12:4, the Bishop's Bible went back to Easter. The Geneva's correction was undone. The Bishop's Bible also placed Easter at John 11:55, making it the only pre-KJV English translation with 2 Easter readings for Pascha. And this was the Bible that would be handed to the next set of translators as their starting point. Before we move to that next set of translators, I need to say one thing plainly. This error did not come from the Catholic Church. It did not come from the Latin Bible. When Jerome translated the Scriptures into Latin around 400 AD, he came to Acts 12:4, and he kept the Greek word as a Latin loanword. He wrote Pascha. The Latin Bible never had Easter at that verse. Jerome did not introduce this problem. This is English in origin. It started with Tyndale. It hardened through the Great Bible. It was briefly corrected by the Geneva scholars. And then it was restored by the Bishop's Bible. In 1604, a king issued a set of rules, and those rules made the Bishop's Bible the foundation. That is exactly where we are going next. The Hampton Court Conference was held in January of 1604. It was convened by King James I, who had come to the English throne just months before. He was born on June 19th, 1566, which makes him 37 years old at that conference, weeks before his 38th birthday. He gathered the bishops and the scholars, and he listened to debates about the church, the worship, the scriptures. And out of that conference came a decision that would shape the English Bible for the next 400 years. A new translation would be made, and it would be governed by rules. The rules were issued by the king himself, 15 of them. And the most important one for our purposes is the very first rule. Rule 1 said that the Bishop's Bible was to be the base text for the new translation. It was to be changed as little as possible. The translators were not beginning from the Greek and building an English translation from scratch. They were revising an existing English text. They were taking the Bishop's Bible and improving it, where the underlying Hebrew and Greek demanded it. And the existing English text they were given as their starting point had the word Easter at Acts 12:4. Now, to understand how specific and deliberate these rules were, Consider Rule 3. Rule 3 said that traditional church words were to be kept. Specifically, the word church was not to be changed to congregation. That is how precise these rules were. Not broad guidance, specific words, specific choices. The king had issued instructions about exactly which English words must remain unchanged, and one of the foundational texts the translators were revising already had Easter at Acts 12:4. Here is what the historical record cannot tell us. We do not know what the KJV translators thought about Acts 12:4 specifically. They left no surviving minutes. They left no record of any deliberation about that verse. We do not know if they looked at the Greek, recognized Pascha, and made a deliberate decision to retain Easter. We do not know if they simply reached the bishop's Bible text at that verse and moved on without examining the underlying Greek at all. That record does not exist. The choice was made. The reason was never written down. And so, in 1611, the King James Bible was published. And in that Bible, you could turn to Matthew chapter 26, verse 2, and read the word Passover. You could turn to Luke chapter 22, verse 8, and read the word Passover. You could turn to Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 7, and read the word Passover. The Greek in every one of those verses is Pascha. And then you could turn to Acts chapter 12, verse 4, and read the word Easter. The Greek in that verse is also Pascha. Identical. The same word. The same letters. 28 times translated Passover. Once translated Easter. And the one time is the only time the word Easter appears anywhere in the English Bible. For the next 4 centuries, English-speaking Christians read that word and did not know what was underneath it. Not one of the steps that put it there was an accident. Tyndale, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the King's 15 rules, every link in the chain. And now you know every one of them. That is everything we have been building toward. Let us bring it all together at once. So let me lay every piece of this out one final time, because when you see all of it together, the weight of it is different than when you encounter any single part of it alone. Thread 1, the Greek. The word underneath the English word Easter in Acts 12:4 is Pascha. That same word appears 29 times in the Greek New Testament. In 28 of those 29 occurrences, the King James translators translated it as Passover. In one occurrence, Acts 12:4, they translated it as Easter. The underlying Greek form is identical in all 29 cases. The same word, every single time. The KJV used the word Easter exactly once. They used the word Passover 28 times. And in all 29 of those verses, the Greek underneath is identical. Thread 2. The etymology. The Hebrew word Pesach comes from the verb pausach, which means to pass over. The name was built on the event in Exodus 12, the night the Lord passed over the blood-marked houses of Israel. That word traveled from Hebrew into Aramaic, from Aramaic into Greek, from Greek into Latin, carrying its meaning at every step. And from Latin it traveled into the languages of the world. French calls it Pax, Spanish calls it Pascua, Italian calls it Pasqua, Portuguese calls it Pasqua, Russian calls it Pascha, Greek calls it Pascha, Arabic calls it Farsi, Coptic calls it Pascha. Every one of those words carries the Passover inside it. Only the Germanic languages departed. English says Easter. German says Osten. And the word Easter carries no Passover meaning at all. Thread 3. Bede. The only ancient source that connects the English word Easter to any pre-Christian origin is a single paragraph written by one monk in 725 AD. Bede described an Anglo-Saxon spring month named after a goddess whose name appears in no other ancient source anywhere. Not a second writer. not a carved inscription, not an archaeological record. One paragraph. That is the entire ancient foundation for the Easter etymology. And the popular claim that Easter comes from the Babylonian goddess Ishtar is false. Ishtar is a Semitic word. Easter is a Germanic word. They come from entirely different language families and have no common root. Thread 4. The translation trail. The word Easter entered the English New Testament through William Tyndale in 1526, when the word Passover did not yet exist in English. Tyndale himself coined Passover 4 years later, in 1530, and never corrected his New Testament to match. The Geneva Bible of 1560 corrected it and used Passover. The Bishop's Bible of 1568 reversed the correction and restored Easter. King James I issued Rule 1 in 1604, making the Bishop's Bible the base text for the new translation, changed as little as possible. The King James Bible of 1611 inherited the error. Jerome's Latin Bible, written around 400 AD, never had it. The error is English in origin. Thread 5. The modern translations, the New International Version, the English Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, the New King James Version, the Christian Standard Bible, the New Living Translation. Every major Bible translation published since 1971 has rendered Acts 12.4 as Passover. The correction has already been made. Most people sitting in churches across the English-speaking world simply do not know it. Easter is not in the Bible. It never was. The word in Acts 12.4 is Pascha. The word is Passover, and the word Easter entered that verse through a 16th century English convention that was locked into the King James Bible by a 17th century king's rule and was never removed. But here is what I actually need you to understand. Because the word itself matters less than what the word was hiding. And what it was hiding is the most important thing we have not talked about yet. The word was hiding a connection, a very specific one that the Apostle Paul stated with complete clarity, and one that becomes invisible in English the moment the word Passover is replaced by the word Easter. The verse is 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. The King James Bible says it plainly. Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Modern translations render it this way. Christ our Passover lamb has been sacrificed. And the Greek word Paul uses for Passover in that verse is Pascha. Not a spring festival, not an Easter egg. A Passover lamb. Think about what Paul is doing when he writes that sentence. He is reaching back to Exodus 12, to the night when God passed over the blood-marked houses of Israel in Egypt. He is reaching back to the lamb that was slaughtered, to the blood that was applied to the doorframe, to the act of passing over, from which the entire feast takes its name. And he is saying that all of it was pointing forward. The lamb of Exodus 12 was pointing at something. The blood on the doorframe was pointing at something. The act of the Lord passing over, Pasach, was pointing toward the cross. The Passover event was not the destination. It was the direction sign pointing at the destination, and the word that connects the direction sign to what it was pointing toward is Pascha. The same word in the Greek whether you are reading about the night in Egypt or about the death of Jesus. The lamb was not random. The blood was not decoration. The night in Egypt was not a disconnected story from a different religion. It was the frame the New Testament authors used, again and again, to explain what happened when Jesus died. And the word they used for that frame, every time, was Pascha. Now consider what happened when the English word Easter was placed at Acts 12:4. An English-speaking Christian opens their Bible. They are reading about Herod Agrippa, about Peter's imprisonment, about what Herod is planning, and the text gives them the word Easter, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. And the word Easter does not carry the blood of Exodus 12. It does not carry the Passover lamb. It does not carry the night the Lord passed over Israel. The Greek Pascha carries all of that. The English word Easter carries none of it. And so the thread that runs from Exodus 12 to 1 Corinthians 5 or 7, the thread that says, this lamb is the interpretive key to the cross, that thread becomes invisible in English at Acts 12:4. Not in the Greek. The Greek was always there. But in the English ear, hearing Easter, the Passover was gone. Now I am not telling you this because I want you to change what you call the holiday. That is not the point of this message. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what you are standing inside. Every time you read the word Passover in your New Testament, every one of those 28 other times, you are reading about the same event, the same lamb, the same blood, the same door. The word Passover and the word Pascha carry the weight of Exodus 12 into the New Testament. They carry it intact. That connection is not a theological footnote. It is the frame around everything. That door is still open. That lamb is still the way through. And whether you call it Easter or Passover or Pascha, what matters now is not the name. What matters is whether the blood has been applied to the frame of your life. And that is exactly what I want to talk to you about next. Everything we covered today was given to you not to condemn a word or a tradition, not to make you feel that the name you have celebrated your whole life was wrong. This message was about recovering a connection that the English language temporarily obscured. The God who established the Passover in Egypt and the God who fulfilled it at the cross is the same God who brought you to this video today. He is not standing over the language, he is standing over the covenant. And the covenant has never closed, but I need to speak directly to someone right now. Someone who has listened to all of it today. The Greek word, the etymology, the monk in Northumbria, the translation trail, the king's rules, and something underneath all of it has been pressing on you. Not because of the scholarship, not because of what Tyndale did in 1526, because of the name of the Lamb, because something in you recognizes that this is not just a translation question. This is a question about whether you have ever walked through the door that the Passover was always pointing toward. That is the only question that matters. And if you have never answered it, I want to help you answer it right now. Here is what I want you to know about that name. The name Jesus comes from the Hebrew name Yeshua, and Yeshua means Why has Dahudatzabuech, saves. The angel came to Joseph and recorded it in Matthew chapter 1, verse 21. You shall call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. That wordplay is alive in the Hebrew. Yeshua, Yoshia, he will save. The name was built on the act, exactly the way the word Passover was built on the act of passing over. And the act the name Jesus was built on is the same act the Passover was always pointing toward. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 10 verse 9 that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That is not my promise. That is the word of God. And that word has not changed. If you have never made that confession, today can be the day. Right now. Quietly in your heart or out loud. Lord, I believe that Jesus is who the Scripture says he is. I believe he died in my place. I believe God raised him from the dead. I confess him as Lord. Save me. That prayer has never been turned away. And the God who passed over the blood-marked houses in Egypt is the same God who hears that prayer today. Type in the comments right now, "I accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior." Not because it earns you anything. Because confession matters. Because words matter. You just spent this entire video learning how much the right word matters. If this message moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And hit the like button to help carry this one word further. The Lamb is still Passover. The door is still open. And the covenant that was written in blood before the English language existed is still, after 3,000 years, the only door that leads to the one that never